Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. The internet has birthed literally countless modern mythologies, but honestly, very few are as tragic, as violent, and just genuinely terrifying as the figure we're exploring today. We are going to completely dissect the legend of Dina Angela Clark, or as the digital horror community knows her, Judge Angels. Now, we aren't just recounting some basic campfire ghost story here. We're going to pull apart the deeply unsettling layers of psychological abuse, profound isolation, and supernatural vengeance that birthed a modern monster. Or, depending entirely on your perspective, maybe a dark divine savior. So seriously, lock your doors and get comfortable because we're about to take a deep dive into a chilling labyrinth of trauma and terror that is guaranteed to make your blood run cold. So what actually happens when an angel is born into hell? Well, picture this. It all begins on what was supposed to be a joyous day for the wealthy, highly respected Clark family. Mr. Clark is this famous, incredibly strict, self-righteous judge. After 9 long months of anticipation, the delivery room doors finally open. The nurse steps out, but she isn't smiling. She's completely silent, just trembling with absolute, unmistakable terror. She stammers to Mr. Clark, barely able to get the words out, telling him he just needs to go see the child for himself. And when the judge walks into that quiet room, he doesn't find a perfect, beautiful newborn. He finds a baby girl with little tufts of blonde hair. But her eyes are a boundless, terrifying void. No whites, no normal irises, just an endless, pure black abyss, dotted with these tiny, unnatural, galaxy-like white sparkles, literally like staring into the dark vacuum of space. And instead of embracing his newborn daughter, this supposedly righteous judge recoils in absolute disgust. He shatters the silence of the room, erupting in fury, and immediately declares his own flesh and blood a monstrous, unholy freak of nature. Part 1. A prisoner in her home. And just like that, Dina's tragic fate is completely sealed before she even speaks her first words. Her entire childhood becomes defined by this suffocating, melancholic isolation. She's trapped inside the massive, oppressive stone walls of the Clark Manor. For 13 agonizing years, she is kept totally hidden from the outside world. No school, no neighborhood friends, nothing. This sprawling luxury estate is essentially just a beautifully decorated prison, meticulously designed to hide a secret that Judge Clark believes would utterly ruin his pristine public image. And it really highlights the heartbreaking juxtaposition of her upbringing. On one hand, you have the seething, relentless hatred of Mr. Clark. The man actually went so far as to demand a DNA test because he was totally convinced his wife had cheated on him. But get this. Even when the clinical results proved Dina was 100% his biological daughter, his disgust didn't waver for a single second. He tormented her constantly, calling her a monster, a failure, an abomination. But then, on the other hand, you have her mother, Mrs. Clark. Surrounded by all that cruelty, she offered this desperate, unconditional love. In their quiet, hidden moments, she'd softly brush Dina's messy blonde hair, constantly whispering reassurances, telling her those pitch-black eyes were beautiful, and lovingly calling her my angel. To truly wrap your head around the horror of Dina's daily life, you have to understand the extreme paranoia of her father. He didn't just lock the doors. He went out and hired a very specific maid named Misha. And let's be clear, Misha was not hired to dust the furniture or cook meals. This woman had a dark, violent criminal record. She was brought in essentially to be a brutal warden. Her one and only job was to keep Dina terrified, keep her in line, and make sure she never caused a scandal. But here is where the lore gets incredibly fascinating. When Dina was a baby, doctors actually examined those terrifying eyes, and despite their pure black, demonic look, they found absolutely nothing physically wrong. In fact, it was the exact opposite. Her vision was documented as being exactly twice as sharp as a normal human being's. She saw everything with terrifying, perfect clarity. And she didn't just see well, she could see perfectly in the pitch black. So while her abusers thought they were hiding all their cruelty in the shadows, Dina was watching. She saw every lie, every hypocritical act, observing the true darkness of her father's soul with literal 20/20 clarity. Moving on to part 2, the fallen angel's sword. Now, despite the strict, suffocating lockdown that Misha enforced, Dina actually managed to carve out one tiny, highly dangerous sanctuary inside the manor, her father's forbidden collection room. Whenever she could slip past her warden using those eyes to her absolute advantage in the darkened halls, she would sneak in. The room was packed with all these expensive historical artifacts, but there was one specific item that drew her in, like it had this irresistible supernatural gravity. Sitting securely inside a thick glass display case was a pristine, glowing white blade known as the celestial sword. According to the secret lore her mother whispered to her, this thing wasn't forged by humans. Legend says it belonged to a literal angel accidentally dropped to Earth during some violent, apocalyptic heavenly war. And the crazy part? The sword is said to possess its own consciousness, just waiting to bond eternally with a master it deems truly worthy. So whenever this isolated, traumatized kid got close to the glass, the sword would react. It would emit this low, ethereal hum and glow with a brilliant, blinding silver-white light. It was literally calling out through the glass to the girl with the galaxy eyes. Which brings us to part 3, the Christmas Eve massacre. Unfortunately, the quiet melancholy of Dina's secret visits to the sword wouldn't last. The grim reality of the Clark household abruptly shifts into a chaotic, terrifying nightmare. And it happens on a day that is supposed to be all about joy, Christmas Eve. Let's break down this escalating dread hour by hour. Around 5 p.m., there's actually a glimmer of profound hope. Dina and her mom finalize a daring, desperate plan to run away that very night, to start completely over, far away from the judge's tyranny. Dina had even snuck out in a disguise earlier that day, braving the terrifying outside world, just to buy her mom a beautiful photo pendant from an antique shop for Christmas. Just a pure moment of innocent love. But that evening, the hope completely shatters. Mr. Clark finds the packed bags. He is overcome with absolute, uncontrollable rage, and this supposedly righteous judge physically assaults his own wife. Dina hears the screams and rushes in to stop him, but that just turns his maddening fury directly onto her. He's screaming at her, completely obsessed with his public image, terrified of the media finding out about his monster daughter. And with vicious force, he throws Dina across the room. Her head crashes sickeningly into a heavy wooden table. The room spins, and everything just fades to black. When Dina finally wakes up, all the warmth of the manor is gone. She's lying on the freezing, damp stone floor of her father's underground dungeon. It's thick, it's cold, it smells like mildew. And she's not alone. Misha, the criminal warden, creeps down the stone steps with this sadistic smile, ready to hand out a brutal punishment. Misha violently grabs Dina, aggressively scratching her arms with her nails until she bleeds. But down there, in the cold dark, something profound happens. Something inside Dina's mind finally, permanently snaps. A deeply rooted psychological fracture. All those years of isolation, the endless abuse, the sharp vision that saw right through all the adults' lies, it all just boils over into this terrifying metamorphosis. She doesn't even feel the searing pain of her bleeding arms. Instead, this cold, unhinged clarity washes over her. Tapping into a terrifying new strength, she reaches up, wraps her bare hands around Misha's throat, coldly declares the woman guilty, and violently strangles her to death right there on the stone floor. Standing over the lifeless body, chest heaving, Dina experiences a total psychological break. She stares down at her trembling, bloodied hands and whispers to herself in this chilling mix of profound shock and deeply unsettling elation, "I killed someone. I killed someone."
Part 4. Becoming the judge.
Now, Dina doesn't cower in the corner after this. She doesn't run to the police. Down in the depths of that dungeon, her shattered mind totally embraces a dark, terrifying new identity. She is no longer the victimized daughter. She genuinely believes she has been reborn as an avenging angel of divine justice. Her very first stop? The forbidden collection room. She completely shatters that thick glass case and claims the glowing celestial sword. The second her fingers wrap around the hilt, the blinding white light flares up, it practically sings in her hands, officially bonding with its new corrupted master. Armed with a literal divine blade, she methodically marches toward her father's office. But before she can get her revenge, tragedy strikes. She finds her beloved mother lying dead on the floor, fatally stabbed by Mr. Clark. The cowardly father sees the glowing sword illuminating the blood-soaked room, and he turns to run. But Dina is infinitely faster. With terrifying grace, she swings the blade, cleanly slicing through his leg muscle and sending him crashing to the floor. As this supposedly great judge crawls through his own blood, begging for his life, she steps heavily right onto his open wound. He's screaming in agony, but he's still calling her a monster, insisting that a judge must be perfect. Dina just looks down at him with this broken, sinister smile. She plunges the glowing sword directly into his stomach over and over, completely mutilating him, while leaning in close to ask if his actions were ever truly beautiful or truly perfect. The grisly climax of the Clark family has finally arrived. Standing tall over the broken, bleeding, whimpering body of the man who imprisoned her in a living hell for 13 years, Dina raises that glowing white sword high into the air. The ethereal light is just reflecting off all the pooling blood, and with this intense, unhinged malice, she delivers her iconic, terrifying decree. Dina Clark, now I announce that you are guilty. With one swift, devastating motion, she completely decapitates him. But the vengeance doesn't stop there. She literally picks up his severed head by the hair, walks over, and hurls it directly into the burning fireplace, standing there watching the flesh begin to crisp. Then, in a surreal, deeply unsettling final act, she methodically washes the blood off, changes into a pristine, innocent white dress, and carefully packs her mother's body into a large suitcase so she can give her a proper burial. Bathed in the glow of the flames, she slowly walks out into the dark, freezing forest, never once looking back as the Grand Clark Manor burns entirely to the ground.
Finally, Part 5, Dissecting the Lore. Okay, let's step back from the visceral horror of the narrative for a second and actually dissect the lore here. We're going to do a clinical, forensic breakdown of how she operates in the broader creepypasta universe. We need to look at her official canon stats, basically treating her like a highly dangerous subject that needs to be contained. Her real name is Dina Angela Clark, and in the current active lore, she is permanently 15 years old. Her primary weapon is obviously the celestial sword, which gives her lethal, extended melee reach and supernatural cutting power. But she does have a highly specific, documented combat weakness: ranged attacks. If you want to survive an encounter with her, you have to maintain extreme distance. If she closes the gap, you're already dead. But honestly, her psychological profile is where the true terror lies. 13 years of extreme sensory isolation, plus the horrific trauma of finding her mother murdered, left her mind deeply, irrevocably scarred. She officially suffers from severe bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. But that trauma twisted itself into a terrifying God complex. She genuinely, wholeheartedly believes she has the divine right and the obligation to execute sinners. And she often lets her blind, psychotic rage completely take over during these lethal, bloody trials.
And within the massive, deeply interconnected digital folklore of internet horror, Dina has some fascinating and really unsettling canon connections. For starters, she was originally conceptualized and created by the online artist known as Yugui. Now, in the official expanded lore, she's actually romantically shipped with another famous violent character called the Bloody Painter. It's such a terrifying dynamic when you think about it. Two deeply fractured minds sharing this twisted, psychotic sense of artistry and justice that they only express through extreme violence. But it's not all romance in the lore. She also has some incredibly bitter, violent enemies. Most notably, she's locked in this seemingly endless, bloody rivalry with the undead, chainsaw-wielding killer known as Nurse Anne. Their battles are legendary among fans because, well, it's a clash of immortal monsters. In one famous, incredibly gruesome comic interaction, Judge Angels actually manages to swing her sword and cleanly slice off Nurse Anne's head. But instead of dying, Judge Angels just has to stand there and watch in absolute horror as the undead nurse casually reaches down, picks her own severed head up off the floor, pops it right back onto her neck, and violently revs her chainsaw to start round 2.
You know, the legend of Judge Angels certainly doesn't end with the burning of the Clark Manor. The lore actually states that merely a month after those ashes cooled, terrified reports started flooding the local news. Witnesses spoke of this ghost-like teenage girl in a pristine white dress, stalking the absolute darkest corners of the city with a blindingly glowing sword, actively hunting down the wicked and the corrupt. There's this one particularly chilling account of a man who was openly mocking the concept of angels and divine justice. He walks into a pitch-black alleyway to smoke a cigarette. Suddenly, with terrifying speed, he is violently pinned against the cold brick wall. A girl with pure, pitch-black, galaxy-filled eyes leans in unnervingly close. She slowly puts a pale finger to her lips and whispers into the darkness, "Shh, you need to be quiet during a trial." Just take a second to imagine that silence. So I'm gonna leave you with this final, deeply unsettling thought. If you found yourself trapped in a pitch-black alleyway with the glowing sword of Judge Angels illuminating the dark and those endless, starry eyes looking directly into the deepest, darkest corners of your soul, what would your verdict be? Innocent or guilty?